Okay, I'll start over here just a little bit, because I'm not sure exactly when it cut me off. But it's typified by machinery, precision, speed. You want to go fast, obviously. You need to be precise in making sure you don't crash, but you also need to be precise in how you set the machine. Okay. They're constantly making adjustments to these cars, particularly in between races. Sometimes in the middle of a race, they'll just pop up the hood, take a little wrench, and as part of the team that does the pit stop. These pit stops are incredible, by the way. It's just, they're so precise. They even have these gigantic things where the fuel is all up here so that it gets pumped in by gravity, so you can get it in there. You don't have to put it down and have a hand pump to try to pump it in. Gravity just pushes the fuel in very quickly, and they take off 4 tires and do all these other things and clean the windshield and take off a tire, put it on, tighten the nuts and on the tire, and you're gone in 8 seconds. There's constant attempts to either cheat or bend the rules in NASCAR. There's certain specifications that you have to have your engine adhere to, and sometimes these guys don't want to do it, and they try to figure out ways to hide it, or sometimes they'll try to change it back right before the race. Well, I guess it's gotten to the point where NASCAR sends around an inspector, and the inspector will sort of close the hood, put a seal over it, and sign it, and then right before the race starts, someone will go through with an X-Acto knife and break the seals, because you need to be able to open the hood if you need to in a pit stop. They try to find all these ways to keep people from doing these little tweaks that you're not supposed to do. There's another thing called bump drafting, which is that if you want to be behind another car, okay, and then you can try to get around them, because if you want what's called clean air, and this may sound like it's not a thing, but it is, and there's a science behind it. That if you're the first to go through you see this in bicycle racing too. The people who are up front are expending more energy in cycling because they have to cut the wind resistance. But if you tuck in behind someone else, you exist in their slipstream. And so you're only expending the energy of pedaling, not pedaling through air. Okay. And it's like 1%, but it's enough to save up your speed, to save up your energy over a long race. Well, in racing, particularly stock car racing, that they call it dirty air, and the air comes into the carburetor and gets put out as exhaust, but the exhaust is low down, and things are going so fast that no one it's not like the next guy behind you is pulling in exhaust into his engine. So he's getting good air. Okay. So often what will happen is they'll call it drafting. And what will happen is if you do it properly, you can be coming behind a person and you've built up speed that they don't have and they can't match. And if you pull out quickly, you can often get around them. And then they have to try to get in behind you and do the same thing to you. But often the advantage you get is so much that you leave them behind. Okay. But then there's another thing on top of that called bump drafting, which is where if you actually come up and just barely tap them, I'm not even sure why this seems to work, but then I think it makes for an even better slingshot effect. And, they didn't want bump drafting. And so what they did at one point was they created a car, NASCAR engineered a car, where they made the back bumper pretty sturdy, but the front bumper crinkle. And so if you tried to bump draft somebody, they wouldn't be hurt, but you'd actually screw up the front of your car, which you might be able to get around them, but now you don't have very aerodynamic front of your car. You want things aerodynamic. You want the air to flow over a car. You don't want big things sticking up and things where air can get inside, because that slows you down. And you're talking about, a tenth of a second being, key. Endurance and concentration of primary importance. We talked about that. These guys will lose sometimes, I think, 5 to 10 pounds. They lose a lot in sweat during a Now they often have water bottles, and if there's a caution, if there's a crash, then what's called a caution, you slow down and you drive normally. They might be able to take their water bottle and get some water in. But these guys lose pounds because it's a very hot machine, and they're stuck in there for hours on end, and you lose a lot through sweat. So endurance, concentration, powers of concentration. We've talked about the gross advertising spectacles, except for the land speed racing, with the hats and, everything is, every surface essentially has something printed on it. Okay. It draws largely from a white working class base. I think I had you read some things about Bubba Wallace, who was being subjected to racism. He was assigned a garage that had a noose in it for pulling up and down the garage. Turns out that noose had been there for a while, and I remember one of the news outlets was saying, "Aha, it's not racism. It wasn't done specifically for him." But then the question was, okay, so why did somebody in a southern track put a noose there, and why has no one complained about it or done something about it in the past? That became the question. But it's a sort of a white working class fan base, and white working class people, particularly from the South and Appalachia, tend to be quite conservative, tend to have views that maybe don't coalesce with other views involving race. Trump, they're the sort of the Donald Trump's base, very religious, very family oriented. I don't want to bash the South. After all, I was born in the South. But, from a kind of a perspective that I think would make a lot of us feel uncomfortable when it comes to, what their specific views to race are, and why they don't see a problem with a noose hanging up in a garage assigned to a black man, or promoting the flag that was a sort of a pro-slavery, pro-Confederacy flag. Don't believe the revisionist historians that say it's just about, Southern culture. No, it's specifically linked to the slave system. Okay. Events often merged with all-day parties. I remember when we went to the California Speedway. You could go to right down here in Fontana, there, or maybe it's in Ontario, but they have 2 races a year here in California, not 20 miles away from La Sierra University. It's just a big festivity. We bought a pass that allowed us to go onto the track and down into the pits, and boy, was that worth it. We were doing this for my dad, and I just, okay, my mom and I are just there to support my dad, but my mom and I loved it too. It was just an absolute spectacle. It was just like a big party, like tailgating. And then you walked around, and there was all these tents that were selling things, and from the sponsors, and people were handing away stuff. It kind of felt like you were at the LA County Fair, and then you got to go into the track and see all the cool stuff that was there, and the pit stop, and talk to the people in pit row and ask them questions, and you got to walk on the track. And at the corners, the track is it's not 45 degrees, but it is. You can barely walk up it, without like a rope to pull you. That's how they keep them in. It's centripetal force. If they were trying to race that quickly on the curves, they go on a flat, they go flung off, so they have to bank the curves. It was just so much fun, and then the race itself was really cool too. Just kind of a party atmosphere, nothing in the U.S. competes financially or for popularity though with what they do in Europe, and they do what's called more Grand Prix or road racing, which is they basically take a part of a city and wall it off. And it's not just in a circle. It's not in a straight line. It's not in a circle like IndyCar or NASCAR. It's not in a straight line like speed racing, speed record racing or drag. This is more like, some straight, and then they come and they do it's more like a course that does, this type of thing. A lot of turns, and sometimes even doubling back on yourself. And I just don't find it that interesting. I like speed. If I'm going to watch racing, I want to see things go fast. Whereas here it is fast, but you're constantly having to slow down and go around corners. But, when they talk about who makes the most money per year in sports, there's often someone from Formula One right towards the top. Like Michael Schumacher was number one. I mean, like way above anyone in the United States, like Michael Jordan or Tiger Woods. You're gonna see maybe some American stars from basketball in particular. You might see some golfers, particularly when Tiger Woods had all these sponsorships. And you're going to see people from one of a couple leagues, La Liga or the Premier League in soccer, or you're going to see someone from Formula One. Mount Rushmore. Sorry, didn't mean to forget that. Okay, so here's my Mount Rushmore. Richard the King Petty. I mean, I don't think his number of victories will never be reached. He came from a racing family. He was one of the best racers. He's still number one on the all-time wins list. I don't know where Jimmy Johnson is, but Jeff Gordon, I think, was number 3, and said, if I keep going for 10 years, I'll catch number 2, but I'll never catch Richard Petty. He's just the best. And, he had this kind of cool look to him. He wore these kind of like fancy cowboy hats and always had dark glasses on and had that mustache. I mean, he sort of looked like he'd be a good stock car racer. John Force in drag racing. There were a couple drag racers that really kind of competed against each other. One of them was John Force, and they nicknamed themselves the Cobra and the Mongoose, which are two animals that fight against each other and are very quick in their fighting against each other. The mongoose is about the only animal that will actually try to kill and eat a cobra, because mongoose are really quick. So that kind of put them on the map. Mario Andretti is my pick for Mount Rushmore for IndyCar, particularly since not only was he very dominant, but he's sort of like the scion of a family of Andrettis that all did really well at racing. And then finally, Craig Breedlove. He's not the one to break the sound barrier, but he's the one that just kept upping this. I can't remember how many times he broke his own record for the fastest land speed record. And what had to happen was, for land speed record, they take you run one direction, and then you have to do, within I think like a couple of hours, you have to run the opposite direction, and they take the average of the 2 runs. So if there's wind going one direction or not, that it kind of averages out. And he just kept setting the record, kept getting closer and closer to the sound barrier. And then I think it was somebody else that actually ended up doing it, because I think by that point he was an old man. So that's the Mount Rushmore for racing.